Om Shanti, good evening. Welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. And tonight our topic is inner durability. As usual, we'll start with a reflection. I can feel that the world around me is changing very quickly. It's a world in transition. So much movement, so much speed of time, complexity, uncertainty. But as I start to draw my attention from the outer world into my inner world, there can be a huge contrast. With practice, my inner world can remain simple, quiet, and still. An anchor, a center, a place of sanctuary, the eye of a storm. Movement out of the outer world outside, and a calm, quiet space inside. So that when I come into my inner world, I can recharge, refresh, recenter, re-energize. Empowering me to respond to the changing world outside from a place of serenity and clarity. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. So welcome to those who just joined. Again, as Judy mentioned, our topic is inner durability. And so if souls weren't aware, we are exploring the different capacities that we souls have. And this capacity we often call the power of tolerance. And perhaps maybe we chose those words specifically, inner durability, for a reason. Because usually when we hear the word tolerate, it's not necessarily perhaps maybe a clear understanding of what that means. I was actually quite touched about hearing Judy, actually, you shared an example at one point in time. But perhaps maybe before we go into that, if you can maybe just share what tolerance means, because it's at least in Raja Yoga compared to what maybe our perceptions of what it means or how we use it actually.
In our morning study, sometimes a song is played, and one of them is along the lines of, the world may change, but we will not change. And so what tolerance really boils down to is the ability to stay on track. That I've got an objective, ideally an objective that is beneficial to the self. And as I'm moving along, there will be, it's just the nature of change that when we embark on a change, there will be that resistance or opposition to the change. So as I'm moving along, different obstacles and such will come up, but I will not be derailed or distracted, stay on track towards my destination. That's really what tolerance, it's quite critical whenever dealing with change, because there's such a pull to want to go back to the old, to slip into old habits. So to be able to, if you will, tolerate those withdrawal symptoms, and be able to stick to the point, stay on track.
Usually we hear that word tolerate and it's used as like girding through something.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were talking about tolerating with that withdrawal, what does that feel like?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, spirituality tells us that, if we feel that something challenging or aversive is going on around us, if we're experiencing it that way, spirituality will tell us that it has something to do with something inside, that some button inside that's always connected to something inside the self. So, um, I find the most interesting thing about tolerance with that understanding is to be able to appreciate, have that clarity. Okay, I'm finding this challenging or aversive because of something inside me, and not to get um, violent around the whole thing, in terms of the girding. So, very often the words tolerance and love are used interchangeably to suggest that some understanding is required. It's usually, quite frankly, it's one's own ego that makes something unbearable or difficult. So, a lot of it said that love can melt ego. So, a lot of understanding is required, um, to be able to, um, meet that challenge in an effective way and really melt the feelings around it. And also, I think the other piece with understanding is, we use the term intoxication or enthusiasm, but to be really excited, and to sustain that excitement. It's amazing what we can tolerate, if you will, be able to move through if we're really energized and adrenaline and excited about it. So, those are two really important energies about tolerance spiritually, is to have a lot of understanding and to have a lot of enthusiasm.
Do you have a sort of more of a day-to-day example or something in terms of what that would look like when there's love for something?
I, of course, get to be with athletes a lot during the day. And the whole idea of, you know, fitness, athletic endeavor is that you're constantly, as we say, upping the bar, constantly trying to improve performance. And that means that you will challenge the body. It's really the only way. And it's not necessarily a heavier weight. I could challenge it qualitatively as well. But the point is some exposing it to some challenge. And so one has to be really excited about the results. If I am able to meet that challenge, what results await me on the other side? So I'm always amazed. It's really a headspace that they go into. I'm always amazed at what athletes can tolerate, because of where their head, their attitude, their headspace is. They really, yeah, I often would wonder if they are literally they all experience it differently. The same challenge is experienced differently, and what makes that difference. But I think it's really neat, very simple example that you're driving home and there's a a lot of traffic and you have to tolerate moving at a slow speed and not getting where you want to, and how different people, I'll be driving along and it's very crowded, etc., and I'll see the car behind me make space for someone to merge. It's a small thing. It means that they are one car later reaching their destination. And what were they feeling at that moment that they could allow someone else to go in front when everyone else just wants to get and can't really tolerate or accommodate that? So, what different people are experiencing, what's going on inside, such that different people feel challenges in a different way. What's happening inside? It's all going on inside. It's really nothing to do with the external. So yeah, what are the different elements that transform how we experience something?
I find it's extremely powerful when you're sharing because there's so much inner dynamic that's happening and we don't even realize it, and perhaps maybe often feel powerless.
Mm-hmm.
And these two pieces, like, I can't see what's going on and I don't know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. The nice thing that I like about all of these different powers we're looking at is they all come under the one category of spiritual power. So if I'm just focusing on spirituality and well being, I kind of get these powers naturally rather than having to try and figure it out or think it through. And it can be really simple. I really enjoyed, some are very, and I will not generalize, but I think we can often find that when we have many advantages in our daily life, which we do, I'm sure if you are watching this, that you probably have a roof over your head and you probably were able to eat food today without too much concern about hunting and gathering and you had money to go get what you needed. So we're doing okay, right? We're all comfortable. And what we notice is that can often happen um, is the more comfortable one's life is, their tolerance levels can be lower. So the smallest thing causes irritation. And it doesn't have to actually be that way. It all depends on what's going on. But very often it's only in crisis that souls even seek out spiritual support. I was just talking to someone today, and it was a very interesting conversation because they had reached a point, the crisis. So our lives aren't really in critical. They might feel a little more critical now, and we are seeing more people seeking out spirituality, which means that they're naturally going to cultivate the inner resources we're talking about. And that means that their tolerance levels will increase naturally. So they'll start to notice that little things that used to bother them don't bother them. If they don't get their meal right at noon, but it comes at 1, it's okay. So it happens naturally if I'm focusing on spirituality.
So, further to that, because I do believe that's very important that we're not focusing on these powers without any um, no any relationship to what the whole point of these interviews are, is about Raja Yoga. Can you perhaps it would be just really helpful for those who are listening in terms of just their own practical practice and seeing indicators? Can you think of an actual experience of experiencing yourself to be a soul? It could be a very simple situation where you're able to so-called tolerate, um, it's a very different response versus a time when a usual expected response we have out there is that you would just be girding, or
Mm-hmm.
that you should feel that everyone's going to feel impatient or
Mm-hmm.
a feeling of rejecting.
Mm-hmm. So one example might be tolerating insult. So if it is ego that is creating that feeling of intolerance, then obviously self respect, which is what spirituality specializes in, or we say purity, would help the tolerance levels to go up. So just finding that if you're, if I'm in a situation that others might find insulting or hurtful, and to find that that isn't actually the effect it has, because of not having that ego kind of operating at that moment, but having spirituality operating. I think what can happen is that there is the emotional trigger and then the girding happens. So it's like, okay, I feel hurt, but I know I should really be mature and tolerate. And so we kind of push down or try to gloss over the emotional reaction that's happening, and it's still there, and it's still coming in the way that I'm operating in subtle ways. Whereas if I can genuinely go into that spiritual stage, which creates self respect, then there's not the emotional reaction, doesn't even happen. There's a lot of understanding, but the emotional, and so it's a completely different vibe and attitude. So, yeah, to me, that's again spirituality in action.
Have you noticed you had instances like that more and more in your
Um,
study, in your journey?
I suppose so. I mean, I think that tolerance is such a huge one because it's dealing with the ego issue. So I think I would not ever say, oh, yes, I have complete tolerance. No, no. But I think there's more awareness around it in terms of what's going on. So, there might be still some triggers happening, but there is, if you will, the light of understanding rather than just sort of pushing it down, but it's sort of festering inside. So there can still be triggers, but they almost at times are entertaining. I remember there was points when I was like, you would see yourself being assaulted, and it just quite frankly felt melodramatic. And you go,
So you're feeling,
yeah,
you're watching
yeah,
yourself.
you see it happen. You go, you literally I go, ego, really, really. I mean, you're being so obvious, ego. You're being so obvious. There's no imagination whatsoever in what's like it gets. And obviously, there's some very extreme situations where that's good, but you start to notice that you're somewhat entertained because you're more aware of what is going on. Again, in the past, it might be that person hurt me, right? And I shouldn't have to tolerate that. And then you start to realize, well, why did I feel hurt? Why did that person why am I giving that control? And you start to realize, actually, it's something within me that created that experience of being hurt. And, I remember I would watch other people, and it's like they seem completely undisturbed by things that others would say, wow, that was really hurtful. And they'd be completely undisturbed. And I thought, that's amazing. So either it comes by it naturally or perhaps their own effort, but clearly it's something inside of us. And so as we pour more light and practice in there, then we're more and more aware. It might still be happening, but we're more aware, which means it has less control, if you will. I'm not, again, pulled off track.
I'm really glad you gave that an actual example
Hmm.
because um, I think that there are many who feel that, I know I've mentioned this before, spirituality can feel quite abstract. Like,
Hmm.
do I actually see that actually happening? Do I see that, perhaps maybe those who have been practicing long enough, and from you, where you're sharing, actually, I was really feeling that there is this capacity of being able to see ego without identifying with it, which is
Hmm.
the aftermath, the accumulation of actually identifying yourself. for who you really are as a soul and your qualities, not and there becomes a letting go of basically indulging in and engaging in ego and all these other
Mm-hmm.
things that trap you that way. So it's not like you're having to remind yourself and think your way through when that happens. There is
Mm-hmm.
this feeling of being entertained because you really are really not identifying with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you're watching spirituality in action when you get to
Mm-hmm.
hear that.
Yeah, it's you're slowly kind of building up yourself, which we often say building up tolerance, but we're actually just building up a sense of self, um, or if you will, starting to melt the buttons, which are not me, but which I had started to identify with. So, yeah.
It does feel like that there is this lightness that is there that allows for there to be, you can call it tolerance, which is quite opposite from what our ideas of tolerance is. Because when you hear tolerance, you hear girding, which
Mm,
is
very
connected to
heavy. Mm-hmm.
heaviness. So that's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that one of the top, if you will, signs I remember hearing of a spiritually evolved being or a healthy human being, I suppose, is a couple. One is lightness or cheerfulness, and the other is easiness. And easiness to me is like such a tolerant, a completely tolerant being, very, very easy. And I think people hear easy and they think doormat. This idea of you have mistreated me for so long, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore, and putting up boundaries, and but that we only do that if there is a lot of sensitivity in the soul. And when I say sensitivity, of course, it's wonderful to be sensitive and empathic and aware, but sensitivity is in easily affected or reactive. And if all of that is removed, the soul's very light and easy. As I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make me feel inferior without my consent. So it's not a case of having to put up boundaries, but really to develop, evolve the self so that there's just so much self respect, such a liberation from ego, which is the cause of intolerance.
When you share self respect, and there's so much within what that means. Maybe we have a very perhaps two-dimensional idea what that means, but it does feel like not with one becoming technical, but there is that lightness that's in it. This detachment from that which isn't you that's in it. And hearing you share actually reminds me, I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about the earth and the atmosphere.
Mm,
There's a lot of things that actually come crashing onto
mm,
onto the earth. And if it wasn't because of that atmosphere that was there, you'd probably be seeing a lot of debris heading from the sky. And so I was actually thinking about the atmosphere, the stage that we can actually have. It's very internal. That actually allows us to be able to accommodate, adjust, adapt to a lot of things that would usually, and I say usually in the sense that we usually are expected to respond to things in a very reactive way.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, these two qualities behind it of it's actually the same thing, but love and love and love, because love is to be understanding is love. So to have that understanding, but also a deep, deep interest or enthusiasm is also love. I love to do that. We say, I love to do this or that. So there's lots of enthusiasm. So where it's amazing how transformative when there is this love, these different shades of love in terms of enthusiasm and recognizing benefit and attainment and understanding where there is that happening, it literally will transform. I'm thinking the image of a parent where the child is sort of running around doing crazy stuff, and the parent just is like, I always would be in awe if I'm talking to a mother and they're holding their toddler and the toddler's hitting them in the face and poking them and spitting on them. And they just keep talking away and, and they're completely, you said, now, normally we wouldn't tolerate that kind of thing. But the mother, there's just love, right? A deep understanding, a deep sense of connection and value, cherishing. So there's just love. So they don't even, the mothers would not even use the word tolerant. So, and they probably are the greatest symbol of tolerance that we have on the planet. So, um, where are they? Like, what are they experiencing such that they clearly feel very differently about what's happening? So these are really important qualities for that easiness, lightness, is these different shades of love.
So, when it comes to oneself, when you mean love, you mean
Mm.
that what is developed because of soul consciousness.
Yeah, soul consciousness means I recognize myself. There's two parts to it. I recognize myself as a spiritual being, and there's several capacities that go with that. But I also understand my story. Um, so I'm now having a deeper appreciation of my potential. And when there is recognition of these two things, who I am, what I am, it changes our feelings in a very natural way. And really, that can sound intellectual. I won't really know that until I experience it. But it literally will change how I experience things. So there's incredible power. Again, all these capacities are coming from being in a spiritual state.
It's quite interesting when you were sharing earlier at the very beginning of the segment of this topic of tolerance that it's not really anything out there. It's because of something inside that has probably touched ego, and I've identified with that. Because what I was going to ask, my next question was, then would my responses to others be different? We use that word loving. It's quite interesting
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's a part of the girding and the tolerance that you're trying to perhaps maybe not even tend to something that feels hurt or offended inside, and you're just trying to sort of, again, be kind to somebody, and it may not be the real thing, but it's still a part of that old idea of tolerating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always find it really amazing. We mentioned earlier the idea of mothers have an incredible amount of tolerance, and said this is an organization that puts mothers in front. So somehow the practice of soul consciousness, spirituality, almost emerges a maternal quality within the soul, and paternal, a lot of power as well. But these very maternal qualities or maturity that enables us to, without it being intellectual, but to feel and see things in a different way, understand, interpret things in a different way, which again will affect our feelings. Um, I can't bypass soul consciousness to get to that state of seeing and interpreting things. It comes very naturally when I am soul conscious, but it's a real maturity that's natural. And I think that's a huge part of tolerance, actually. So I was just thinking today. There was an incident where I went to visit someone, and there was the understanding that these souls are all in a sort of a different headspace in their life. And anyways, one of the caregivers was trying to help me out, and there's an ongoing issue of separating two souls. Anyways, so the soul that we're trying to explain, they'd have to stay while we take the other one somewhere else. They were getting quite, I would say, verbally abusive to the caregiver. And and it was very sweet to watch the caregiver, because you could tell he wasn't insulted, because he understood. There was a maturity there. He understood. I'm not going to say he was practicing soul conscious, but the power of understanding is huge in terms of experiencing things in a different way. And that's really important, especially when it comes to the self. We're, I'd say we're most intolerant of ourselves. And because that's a very uncomfortable state, we eventually turn that intolerance outwards. But it starts with being intolerant of the self. We have very little understanding of ourselves. We're very intolerant when we make mistakes or don't live up to our potential or whatever the case. We get very harsh on ourselves. So, how to remain disciplined, directed, committed without having that violent form of intolerance happening is a huge part of transformation.
When you were mentioning about that caregiver, I really felt like as if before even coming into that situation, that awareness has been very clear for perhaps maybe quite some time because he's been working there.
Mm-hmm.
Like as if that awareness is applied all the time. Not
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm going to apply this awareness, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
there and
Mm-hmm.
it's this part. But it reminded me of this class we were listening to earlier today when one of the senior students was sharing about what I'm learning in Raja Yoga. Don't let it just stay as something intellectual. It's something that I actually need to actually find that's relevant in my day to day. Otherwise, it's I'm not really sure how one actually can change. So it's quite, meaningful when you are even sharing that any intolerance out there is because I can't even be able to experience that within myself. So I was just wondering, this awareness of being a soul. It's you've been in the study for quite some time, and there's something that you have shared before. Like, do I understand the significance of it?
Mm-hmm.
On a day-to-day level, for it to actually be something useful and meaningful. What does that mean when you were sharing that?
Around the topic of tolerance, as you mentioned earlier, to experience myself to be a soul is to, we can either say, activate true self respect or put me in a place where I'm liberated from ego. So I could sit there and say, okay, I'm a point in the center of the forehead and not actually experience self respect or freedom from ego. So that's only happens if I don't just visualize a point in the center of my forehead, but become that point and become free of the image. So we're always checking against those signs and signals whether or not I'm actually getting the benefits of being soul conscious. So, yes, I could visualize a point in the center of my forehead and still say, yeah, but it really bothers me when they do this at work. So that would suggest that I'm not actually experiencing soul consciousness. I'm just doing a visualization. So to really not just, okay, there's a point in the center of my forehead. No, I am that spark and this body's wrapped around me. And I really want to go into the experience of this massive reframing of self, massive reframing of self. There is huge benefits in that reframing, but appreciate there's also many fears. And so we try and find a middle ground, where I can kind of stay on this side of the fence and that side of the fence. And of course, that won't work. But I really, to really go into being a soul means it will be a complete transformation of life as I know it, with great benefits, we feel, obviously. So if I want to get those benefits, I need to check the authenticity of my practice.
Perhaps just one question before we have a little reflection. When you were sharing, it does feel like, and this was the example that I was thinking about when you had shared about tolerance years ago, was that perhaps maybe someone who perceives someone who's tolerating in a meaningful way may not really actually be able to experience what is going on within that soul. Where you had used the word serene during the reflection earlier, that if I was really going into that sense of reality of being a soul, um, how I'm experiencing things is very different. It's not a sort of a thinking exercise.
Yeah, there's definitely what is witnessed from someone on the outside and what the person is experiencing on the inside. So we might see someone being able to endure something and say, wow, you were really tolerant. And they have a confused look on their face because they didn't feel that they obviously experienced it very differently, that there was no tolerance required. It didn't bother them at all, quite frankly. So again, what's going on inside is so much running the show. And the deeper, more subtle I can develop mastery, then I think the more I will experience things in a different way.
Well, hopefully that inspires those who are watching or will be watching to really focus on just, again, practicing soul consciousness. Perhaps maybe sometimes we are driven a bit by ego, like, well, I'm not seeing change, I'm not seeing benefits, but
Mm-hmm.
it does seem like this isn't just about coping, but just in general, am I able to become one who's not influenced?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Judy. We're going to have a little reflection now. And again, we're always watching to see if there's anyone who has questions. But if you have topics, questions, feel free to email us. We're more than welcome to address them. Thank you.
There is a beautiful line in the Mahabharata, a piece of advice that's given to the one who will be king, who will reclaim the kingdom. And he is told, resist that which resists in you. That as I, the soul, travel towards my highest potential, full spiritual development, well-being, I may have to tolerate a lot of resistance from within. Ego, attachment, fears, doubt. And there's some very beautiful energies that will help me to override, tolerate, not to be held back by that resistance. Energies such as love for the self, regard for the self, faith in the self, determination for the self. These are cultivated, these energies that support tolerance, endurance. These energies are cultivated when I remember who and what I am. When I am completely certain I am a soul. I am a spiritual being. My true nature is peace. In my pure state, there is self-respect, free of ego. Knowing all of these are not just possible, but inevitable. With that faith, I am able to resist that which resists in me. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you, Judy, and thank you for those for joining this evening. I will pass it back to you, Judy. upcoming sessions, if you recall.
Hmm. You will have to tolerate my ignorance because I know there's things I don't yet know the names for. But we do have drop in meditation again Thursdays. So Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 45 minutes, 6:45 to 7:30, followed by interview. And Sundays, full hour, 6:30 to 7:30. Saturday afternoons is on Zoom platform, Inner Fitness. Speed. Received a touching. Our theme is speed this coming Sunday. That sounds exciting, doesn't it? So, speed this coming Saturday, 2 to 3 on the Zoom platform. So, the information's on our website. Um, I think this is the third Sunday of the month coming up. So, that would be World Meditation Hour. And there is a workshop. Thank you. A workshop this Saturday noon, 12 o'clock to 1:30, 90-minute workshop, The Resilience Within. So again, that's shown on the website. You can register through Eventbrite. And I know that we are just now trying to figure out our New Year's Eve program. So that notice will be coming out soon. So just save the date, the evening of the 31st of December, probably around 6 or 6:30 p.m. That will come next day or two. Thank you for joining tonight. And again, always feel free to email us with your thoughts and questions. Until next time, Om Shanti.